Aye.
Vic,
Yes.
Chairman Shaw.
Did we?
Oh, I forgot Manny, sorry, yes. Manny,
Yes. And I'm aye also.
Sorry.
No, that's quite all right. Motion carries.
This goes to the February 19th billed board. Since it's unanimous, they will make that formal approval as well at their board meeting.
Good luck,
Thank-
Pete.
Thank you for your time. Hopefully, we can have that continue to be as efficient as possible. So to teach me not to have my printed copy here in front of me. All right. Next item on the agenda is a workshop. The rest of the evening, we have workshops. First one is CTF Illinois 6800 to 6820 Centennial Drive. This is a workshop on a special use for substantial deviation from plan unit development.
The petitioner, CTF Illinois, is seeking approval for their special use for the substantial deviation from the Brementown Plan Unit Development. And the purpose of that is to allow for the exterior storage of vehicles and buses in the front yard at the property located at 6800 through 6820 Centennial Drive in the B2 zoning district. CTF Illinois is a not-for-profit organization that helps to assist people with developmental disabilities and their families. They provide educational training, educational, and other opportunities that allow people to grow and become more independent. They have a current location that they locate out at Prosperity Drive, and this will be their new location as they will be leaving that location and dividing up their services amongst other locations. To assist in their mission, they often use vans and 12 to 15 person buses to transport their students. And these buses and vans are typically kept on site so that staff does not need to retrieve them from off-site locations. So our open storage is prohibited in all of our business districts, which includes the storage of vehicles over 8,000 pounds. And so these buses are exceeding that. The vans are not. It's the buses that exceed the 8,000 pounds, which is bringing them here in front of you today. The use is not an issue. The vans are not an issue. It's the use of the buses and their weight limit. So, and in addition, being on a corner lot and the way the buildings are situated, they have no other means to screen these buses from the public right-of-way. So that's another thing that we're asking for approval on. And with this property being a planned unit development, that is the tool we have to kind of allow this. Otherwise, it being prohibited, there'd be no variation option. But luckily, being a planned unit development, it kind of allows you to create your own code for that PUD. So that's what we are asking, the deviation from the original PUD. Here's the site. It's an attractive site, office complex. It's two separate buildings. It was previously for medical use, and then now it's been, I believe it's been vacant. And so these CTF would be, I believe, purchasing the property. So they would be locating all of their programs here. There's ample parking, as you can see. To the north is a daycare facility. To the west is another office complex, and then farther is some townhomes. Again, the zoning is for your kind of shopping use, and there is some assisted living looks to the south of this property in the R7. And it's along Oak Park Avenue. Here are the vans and buses that would be used. There's 4 buses and then the 4 vans. And again, it's the buses that are exceeding the weight limit that is causing the discussion. And not much will change. Obviously, with their site plan, the property lends itself to meet their needs. They have proposed where they will keep the buses and the minivans as far away from the main roadway as possible. There were some calls from some of the adjacent properties who received notice, just questioning a little bit and concerned about the buses, but after we explained to them they're the smaller buses, it's not going to be a parking lot of buses. They seem to be a little less concerned, but nonetheless they felt some of the residents that think outdoor storage should be allowed. And then the business adjacent kind of was concerned about the buses hiding their sign. But we did have a preference for option 2 that would consolidate the location away from Oak Park really has to do with the location of these vehicles being stored outside. So, we're just further discussing the potential for parking of these buses and vans, discuss if there's any additional screening options, and adequacy with the landscape plan. These are kind of our discussion points. I think there are some abilities that, I think Dan was talking to them, that they can maybe beef up some of the landscaping, where feasible, on that west side of the property. And that's really kind of the open items we're kind of looking for discussion. But overall, we don't feel that this is gonna be a use that's gonna detract from the area. It's, a company that's been around for a while, has a reputation, of, being in Tinley Park, but they also provide a great service. And, kind of complements to the north, you have the daycare, you kind of have some, similar kind of uses happening in the area.
How many buses would, of these 12 to 15 passenger buses, how many are they talking about? What would their fleet size be?
Yeah, I think they said it was 4 buses and 4 vans, so it is, a total of, but here on the thing it says 4 shuttles and 3 passengers, so I don't know if there was discrepancy with
Yeah, it's 4 shuttles and 4
vans. So the shuttles are on the left, the vans are on the right. And it's the it's the buses, well, we're calling them buses, but those are what exceed the
The
8,000.
gross vehicle weight on those buses can't be much more than what the vans are.
They're 14,000 versus the 8.
Okay. Well,
The staff report indicates that there's 2 different types of the shuttles. There's a 12-passenger and then 1 15-passenger.
Yeah, which would be the maximum gross vehicle weight on
Right.
15 passenger.
Okay, so was there more to the staff report that kind of covers it?
I know, I think that was kind of the gist of it, because I think the real thing we could only address with them would be landscaping and the location, because there's no real immediate changes that they're proposing,
Okay.
on the location, so.
So as this is a workshop, we'll kind of run through some questions here. We won't necessarily have formal presentation. I'm assuming you're representing the petitioner?
Yes.
Okay. No, you don't have to right now. It's a workshop, it's not a public hearing.
Okay.
So what we could probably do is just keep it informal. We'll run through the commission, see what sort of questions there are, as opposed to you having to get up and give a formal presentation. If, because you might cover something that the commission doesn't really have a concern about, and we would want to make sure that we're as efficient as possible here. Kind of get to anything that would potentially be of concern. And I don't want to make you stand the whole time either. Okay, so Commissioner Stanton, any questions down this end?
Just as far as how often the buses are running, do they like make a morning run, afternoon runs?
Yes. Yeah, the start time is around 8 and the end time is around 3.
Okay.
So and there will be more coming on the parking lot, but those don't stay, those come and go. So these are the permanent ones, these would be the overnight ones.
So on any given day, how many people are there?
There's gonna be to start, there's gonna be approximately 80 individuals, 40 in each building.
Okay.
And so staffing wise, for the parking lot, there's about 40 staff max a day.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
the site has 86 parking stalls
Okay.
on its location, so.
So total parking spaces are not a concern.
Correct.
Commissioner Beck?
The only thing that I would see is just some sort of, after parking vehicles like this, of this weight, the same places every time, there's gonna end up being problems with the parking lot itself. There's gonna be divots, because it's an asphalt parking lot. I've been there, been to that, I haven't been over that way before. So I don't know if there's, I know we have property maintenance standards and things like that for stuff, but just something to make sure that the property is kept up. you know, for those, especially those parking spots, you know, where, because then if they do leave this and leave those properties, you know, then somebody's coming in and might have some problems in that lot. Because it's probably not made to have those vehicles sitting on it all the time, so, you know, especially through the hot summers that we have, and there's no shade over there, nothing to keep it from that, but that'd be my only issue with that,
Okay.
but it wouldn't be a breaker.
All right, Commissioner Manny.
You know, based on on the information, so your option one for locating the parking is along Oak Park Avenue, correct? Is that the preferred location?
Any option to us would be fine, would be up to the commission. I think Dan indicated that he would prefer the option two.
Yeah, I think it was nice that you gave us, we wanted to know where their options were,
Right.
you know, and give you guys, so option two, I think staff was thinking that was the least obtrusive, you know, as far as the visibility from Oak Park Avenue.
Right.
And if you guys concur, we would make that a condition and an exhibit to their approval.
And then what's the visibility to the left, because you have residential to the left?
We do, but there's also a, I don't know if I have a larger aerial. There is still a commercial space in between them and then the townhomes. We can get you some visuals if you'd like for the public meeting, just give you what that
Yeah,
would
what,
look like.
right, because you mentioned there was some concern with the residents, so I wonder if
Yeah.
they're looking out the window and they're looking at,
Sure.
Parking lot.
You were saying-
parking lot, you know, it's not,
That concern was voiced by the adjacent commercial property, not,
We had two. One of them was a representative of the Townhome Association, and like I said, at first they were concerned about, how many buses, and
Oh,
when we
sure.
kind of talked to them, they thought they were the big buses.
School bus type?
yeah, I
Yeah.
specifically meant the line of sight for signage. Who
Yeah,
voiced
that
it?
was the adjacent business next door.
To the west on Centennial?
Correct.
Okay.
Because they do have a monument sign. You can kind of see it. It's right by,
Is that it?
oh,
That
yeah, I see it.
entry into the parking lot
Yeah.
there where the monument is?
Right.
correct. So that was their concern.
Yeah, when I went by, I did not have that in mind, so I didn't specifically look at that, but between now and the hearing, I'll make sure I take a look. I think that for the public hearing, that probably would be good, like, some pictures of that, and for the rest of the commission to take a look, just to, if that is a reasonable concern, I mean, the whole point of a monument sign is to be seen, right? Any,
So I think that was just my only main concern, just, you know, the comments that the commercial business and the residents.
Sure.
Want to make sure we address those.
all right, good. So for myself, the question that Commissioner Stanton brought up about the operating times, I think that's a good one. Obviously, we want to make sure that, I know there's not residential right next door, but there is residential across the way. But playing devil's advocate, you said 8 AM to 3 PM is generally the operating hours?
Staff will arrive between 6:30 and 7, and that's when the vans would leave. And then they come back around 8:30, 9 o'clock. And then the individuals get picked up about 2:30 to 3, so there'll be another route. And pretty much everyone's off the premises at 3 o'clock. And then the vans would come back on about 4:30.
Okay. So this is gonna sound odd, Kimberly. I just want to make sure that I'm stating it correctly here. The question that we have is not the use of vans. For argument's sake, if they had off-site storage somewhere, and then the sites, and then the vans showed up in the morning, did their thing, and, we're coming in and out of the parking lot, we would have no concerns about that in terms of use, right? So hours of operation are really only relevant for that, right? Because if they were coming in within those same hours, there's no concern about the actual use. What we're strictly talking about is the storage overnight, right? Okay, so I just want to, like I said, I know that's a kind of a roundabout way of stating that. I just want to make sure that we're honing in on what the deviation itself actually is, what the concern is. So it's strictly the overnight storage. I myself, I'll just toss it out there, maybe we can get consensus from the rest of the commission. I think Commissioner Manny said this, but my preference would be off Oak Park Avenue as well. The one on Centennial to the southwest would be my preference. Any thoughts from the rest of the commission on that?
Staying south of the building, of the
The one that's on the screen right now,
Right.
as opposed to the one that would be in the upper right-hand corner, the
Yeah.
northeast, that was option one.
The other question I had in regard to, these are all gasoline-powered vehicles? So there's, my question is, so in winter weather, they're not going to be running vehicles all night to keep them warm? Okay, so they're gas, they're not diesels, so that we don't have that issue of the neighbors listening to engines running all night.
Fair point, fair point. Okay, so I think with respect to open item number one, alternate parking question, I think the consensus from the commission is going to be the southwest corner there.
Which we're calling option two?
Option two, yes. So on that, would those spaces, I guess is regardless of which one, would those spaces, is it fair to say they're intended to be dedicated spaces? They'd be marked for shuttle parking only?
Yes.
Right? Okay,
Yes.
good. My concern would be if they weren't clearly marked and then people are parking in them, suddenly the van has to park in the middle of the parking lot and all that. All right. And so Kimberly, you said open item number three, the potential for some additional screening, you guys are still exploring that, right? So
Yeah,
I don't think.
I don't know the quality of the landscaping right now, what's live, because it's kind of the dead of winter, but we have a landscaping plan, so we can always see come spring and summer if it's, the original site is still in compliance, because we still audit all of our commercial properties and make sure they're in compliance, so we might be better able to see how the vegetation is being maintained out there.
And currently, how much of those two properties are not occupied?
They're taking, the only occupancy in the building is the building, 6820. There's, Edward Jones is in one, and DuPage Medical, so it's like, maybe 3,500 square feet out of the 18,000 is occupied right now.
Okay, and you're intending to occupy the entire space, which is a good thing. All right, great. I think that actually covers any of the questions that I might have had. Any last minute points coming from the rest of the commission? Yes.
You might have said this, how many employees would be there on staff during the day? 40?
My other thing here that I have with this would just be that because there was concern from the neighboring, commercial site there, that it somehow be designated that the spots up by the building would be for the shuttles, because those buses are bigger than the vans. They have more, if they're by the street, they have more potential of blocking their sign. And if that's a big concern with them.
That's a fair point.
Something along those lines.
So tucking the buses against the building?
By the building,
As
yes.
opposed to closer to the street?
Yes.
I would, that
Yeah.
would make sense.
Yes, any logistic concerns with that? I mean, is it,
No, we were even the amount of parking, we were going to expand the parking spaces so the vans could be parked in those.
Right there as well,
so
too.
wider spaces?
space and a
Okay.
half.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and now that you mention it, just aesthetically, the vans would be, more pleasing to the eye towards the street versus the shuttles, and tucking them in towards the building. All things being equal, I think that would look better. But other than that, I don't have anything. You need any more,
We'll come back with some more views and pictures for you guys, give you a sense of what that might look like from the adjacent properties. And bring this forth, we'll acknowledge some of the conditions I think you've all mentioned. We'll condition the approval with the site plan, and then marking the parking signs as well would be a condition potentially, it sounds like we want. And then see if the folks come out to the public hearing as well.
Okay. In terms of what you need between now and the hearing, do you have what you need? Good, excellent. So, thank you for coming in. And
Yes, thank you.
I didn't mean to not give you an opportunity to say anything, but you're welcome to. That's what the public hearing's for. All right. Thanks a bunch for coming out.
Okay, take care.
All right. So,
We'll see you February 21st.
Yes.
all right, so our next workshop this evening is Anytime Fitness, 17823 80th Avenue. This is for a special use.
So, we have a petitioner for Anytime Fitness, looking to have what we call and define in our zoning code a commercial indoor recreational use, the fitness center. And it's locating in a space that is greater than 3,500 square feet in floor area, which is triggering the special use requirement. The zoning in this area is B1, which is our neighborhood shopping. So you kind of tend to see, just your general kind of neighborhood uses occupying in these types of shopping centers. The San Frontillo's Pizza and Banquet Space is what maybe some of you all might remember was there before. That is the space that they're going to be occupying. This is a chain fitness center, and they focus on availability to their members for 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You can use the facility. There's over 2,700 of these locations nearby. For example, some are in Oak Forest, Frankfurt, Orland Park. This location will be actually 6,000 square feet in size, which will be a fairly larger location. There will be various workout equipment and lots of services that I can let the applicant speak to if they like. There's some information you'll have in your packet too that kind of summarizes what they're doing. Our only really primary concern with this fitness use at this location was just the traffic and the potential high levels of peak times and customer turnover. Particularly in these locations with the multiple commercial tenants, sometimes there can be issues with adequate parking. So that's what really, again, and I think that's why our zoning code looks at these types of uses exceeding a certain square footage where we make them a special use, because we have to kind of understand how they may impact the adjacent properties. The larger you get, the assumption is the more ability you're going to have more people to occupy the space. And recreation is getting, there's all sorts of new recreation uses coming, so. But here's the center. It's a nice looking center on the corner there of 80th Avenue. It's got some, good tenant mixes. It's in close proximity to the Metro train station, so we think that, there's some opportunity. People might come work out before or after work. This is the zoning, as mentioned, it's B1, and then you have some residential surrounding it, so it truly is kind of a neighborhood shopping center for those that live nearby. Again, I think the main discussion point is parking, and we did ask the applicant to give us some parking information, and I believe that's in your packet to kind of analyze what their other facilities have been utilizing for parking. It's a memorandum dated January 28th, and it gives you hours of some other, gives you the hours of all the other businesses, and then they kind of did some, it looks like they used Oak Forest as an example of where they collected some data from 6 to 7 p.m. And it looks like the average stay was between 30 and 60 minutes. This is mostly utilized via a swipe key from what I understand, so there's not a whole lot of employees that will be here on a regular basis. It's really going to just be the patrons occupying them. There are some security measures in place that allow the folks that go in there, I understand they wear some type of a fob of some sort, so if something should happen, they have the ability to call 911 right away. That was one of our concerns, because you don't really have a facility that's manned by any personnel on a regular basis, but they seem to have figured out a system in their locations that people feel safe, and they have the ability to ask for help if they should need it. Again, the parking is the biggest point of discussion. The center itself has about 157 stalls. That does not include the corner piece, which is the bank that's on the hard corner. But the parking field is not evenly dispersed among the tenants, so it's kind of got an oblong shape, so you might see some of the farther parking stalls not getting used that much. But there's some parking in the rear as well that gives the ability for some of the business employees to park. The site currently has an observed peak parking of 28 spaces during 5 to 7. He notes that there's 5 tenant spaces, including Anytime Fitness, are currently vacant. So there is some vacancies in there. So whoever goes in there in the next spaces will, get determine if the parking is sufficient for them. But Anytime Fitness per their lease is going to be allocated about 29 parking spaces. So yeah, the parking analysis is in your memo if you have any questions on that. I can expand upon that. We don't foresee there's gonna be necessarily a parking issue in the shopping center, based on the information that they've provided us and, kind of what we know what's going on over there. So really the big discussion is, the special use is required because of the size, and really the discussion is the parking. And that's what we wanted to discuss with the group. If they have any other concerns about the parking, it is a 24-hour facility, which is allowed.
Just in an effort to be totally transparent, I live directly behind this
Oh, okay.
proposed.
So you kind of know how the shopping center really is
Yeah,
functioning.
but I just want people to know, so if I weigh in on something, that I'm not doing it because I live there, but I'm just letting people know I live directly behind this
I
project.
imagine when the other facility was there, the parking probably was San Fratello's, was that?
When at its peak, yeah.
Yeah,
Because at one point you had San Fratello's and there was a 7-Eleven at one
Oh,
point around
yeah.
the corner. So parking was never an issue then that I could perceive.
okay. I mean, you'll always admittedly have times where it's.
Is the petitioner have some projection on peak, what the usage of the facility might be at its peak?
Yeah, I think they used their Oak Forest as an example, and that what they were saying was they observed, if I'm saying this correctly, 28 spaces during their evening hours from 5 to 7. Oh, I'm sorry, what? Is Homer Glen in there? Okay, yeah, I'll just go to the sheet that you have the summary. It's easier to read off of that. There we go. So yeah, Anytime Fitness in Oak Forest, you had 15 would be the average maximum number of patrons, from 6 to 7 p.m. And then, let's see.
Can I-
Yeah, go ahead.
So our
This is
two
the
peak,
business owner.
our two peak times are in the morning, between 5 and 7. I think, and there's a graph in there that reaches, the peak is 5:30 a.m., and I think there's about 15 people
15, yeah.
in the morning, and then there's 17 at night. The peak at night is around 5:30 or 6, and it's 17 people. So, average stay is right around 30 to 40 minutes. And a couple other things, we have 4,200 locations, not 2,700, and we're adult only, and we actually only, our radius, when we purchase a territory, is less than 2 miles. I think it's 1.9 there, so we actually try to locate in neighborhood centers, because most of our members live in the neighborhood. So there, we draw from our 1 mile radius as a primary
So you may even be getting a lot of folks that walk
Exactly, yeah.
or on their way to or from the train, et cetera.
Correct.
Listening to those numbers, and only because from
Oh, and I'm
experience
sorry,
there,
The average club size is about 800 members. So even though the size sounds large, it's 5,800 square feet that we're taking, a little less than 6,000. But even though it sounds large, 800 members really isn't a lot when you consider only about 15% of the people use the gym. A lot of people sign up and never go, as you maybe a couple in here have never been guilty of that. But that's the case, so with 800 member on an average size, that's very small for a fitness. I think the break even for Planet Fitness and Charter, just break even, is 7,000 members. So that gives you a perspective on kind of our club size.
And being 24 hours, you don't have, people rushing it. You basically
Yeah, we
have
have
all day.
hospitality workers,
Yeah.
medical, spread out, shift workers, they can't find a gym during the day, so we're adult only, that's another thing.
well, the other thing I can see as an advantage too is the other folks that are currently tenants in those spaces, there's a hair salon, so that you're not gonna have it affect at your peak hours with theirs. There's not very many folks coming to get their hair done at 5 o'clock in the
I was thinking
morning.
exactly the same thing, because there's a physical
Ath-
therapy. place.
Athletico, I think it's called, yeah.
Exactly. I was actually there today, and they were both of those were very busy, and they were parking all in front of where you're gonna be.
It's in the report, their maximum, Athletico, their maximum that they have during the day, I think, is like 18 people. The girl, at the front said.
Right.
So, and it's only one day a week that they're really busy. Most,
Okay.
they have one day during the week, they open at 5:30 AM.
Mhm.
And so they're not really, they're the only other tenant open in the morning,
Okay,
one day a week.
Most of that parking along 80th Avenue there is underutilized.
right, right.
But I think most of the people would park on the front end of our space.
So what was, I apologize, I don't recall seeing it in the report, and I was just going through there again to see if maybe I missed it, but staffing, what's the staffing plan for it?
So each center typically has anywhere from 2 to 4 employees. So there's a manager, trainers, and usually a maintenance person. And then that's pretty standard on all of them.
So at some point during the day, is it unmanned, and then people just access it with their fob?
Correct. So
okay.
from 10 till 7, Monday through Thursday, it's staffed. The trainers advertise as staffed. In the morning, though, the trainers come in usually around 5 or 6 in the morning. So our downtime is typically they're usually in there a little later too. So from 9 till about 5, there's no staff. So there's basically 5 security systems. We have, there's cameras everywhere. They're covering every square inch of the floor and the outside of the door. It's a company called Provision that Anytime Fitness purchased. It's basically about a $50,000 system. So the tailgate system's right over the door. Members have a key fob, and you have to swipe your key. And then during staffed hours, we open a guest door where visitors can come through, and that door makes another noise that lets us know someone entered the gym without a key. The tailgate system, you swipe your key and someone walked in behind someone, that would trigger it. And it's so sensitive it even picks up like bags. You'll see them on the cameras. So then we get notified that someone's entered the gym without their key fob. When they come in, there's a camera positioned on the wall. It takes their picture, and that it goes to an overview, so we know who's in the gym at any given time. So our staff's trained where if they see someone on the floor, they're not in the overview, they approach them, remind them they forgot to swipe their key. If they didn't have a key, then, we would address it. But then inside the gym, like I said, there's cameras. On the wall, there's an AED machine, of course. There are necklaces that are hanging that our cardiac patients can wear, or people that are there late at night that want some more comfort, they're all hardwired right to the police station. So if you press a button, it triggers an alarm to the police station. Basically dials 911. Then there's also a phone on the wall and a panic button. So you can press the panic button or pick up the phone. When you pick up the phone, it's hardwired right to 911, and it's already dialing 911. So we've been around for about 25 years, and that's a system that we've used for the tech.
Great. Is it fair to say all those cameras, if they're notifying in real time, they're probably backed up to the cloud or something, so somebody can't come in and knock the cameras down or something, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
good. And any,
Our members pay a little bit more. By the way, we're closer to like $40 a month.
mhm.
So we do attract more of an adult type professional clientele, so I haven't run into any camera damage yet, so I'm good.
And in terms of any sort of retails or over-the-counter sales of anything there? So the point of my question, I'm looking at safety and security, and everything you just named there is, you know, pretty best-in-class type measures. And I'm looking at what sort of attraction there might be, you know, in terms of somebody coming in there. So is there any sort of cash register, point of sale, or anything like that?
We have a retail wall with some protein products on it, shaker bottles, but
Okay,
it's done with a square. And
There you
so,
go.
I mean, but no one could get in without the key, so I don't know. Am I?
no, that answers it,
Okay.
you know.
So we have T-shirts and stuff on a retail wall.
Okay, good. Any questions you want to start down here?
No, my
You're
stuff's
good?
pretty much
All
cleared
right,
up.
Commissioner Manning?
You know, my question was just, security, but you answered all my questions, to minimize that risk of, if anything, happening.
And Kimberly, you said it, kind of, an offhand comment, but as part of this special use, the hours are not necessarily the concern, right? It's the use itself is a special use. It's a permitted use, but it's a special use.
And like I said, our main concern was parking, because imagine if this was like a gymnastics studio.
Yes.
And then you have, tournaments and stuff like that. I think that's why I believe our zoning code looks at these, the way they do in this district.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you can see, it's kind of a tight, kind of a shopping center.
Yep, okay, good. Commissioner Beck?
No, I've got nothing.
Good. Commissioner
Just
Stan?
curious, is there any other businesses around that area that are open 24 hours?
I don't know that answer. I could find out.
Probably not.
I
Other
can't-
than,
I can't
other than
think of it.
Speedway gas station.
Speedway's probably the closest one, yeah.
I'd say
Yeah,
that's
so that's
the other corner, I think, right? Yeah.
23rd.
Good.
Because there's houses all on the
Right.
80th Avenue side, and it's kind of like some, well, the Metro parking lot with 2,000
And the
people a day
and the
go
library
out
doesn't stay
there.
open 24 hours.
Yeah.
No, I'm good.
So we have, excuse me, for open items, we have the special use itself. We discussed parking. Is it fair to say from the commission, no concerns about parking?
No, I think based on the hours
Okay,
and the
good.
other tenants and their hours, there won't be a conflict, I wouldn't think.
And also consensus basically on the special use itself, the use, no concerns, didn't sound like it. And the last item was signage, was,
Yeah, we just noted that they haven't provided us anything, but they would.
it's an open item.
Yeah.
All right, but at this point, nothing of concern. We'll hear more in the hearing, right? All right. Well, I think we've exhausted it, so thanks a lot for giving us all the information. I appreciate it. And what's the date for the,
It'll be February 21st. We'll have the public hearing.
excellent. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it. Looks like a really good
Don't
business.
forget your sign.
Okay.
Oh, you're the check man. Cool. I get,
Okay,
oh, I
moving right along.
Yeah, I'll sign it. I'll write down the-
Last item on here, and this is a workshop for a text amendment on short-term rentals. I do believe it's been a topic of discussion at village board meetings even, and it's been in the papers, et cetera. So we'll get right to it. And
Well, I know I gave you a lot to read, and, but just because it is an interesting topic and it's becoming more and more discussed, and it's been on my radar about every community I've been at, but in some communities, it's really not an issue, and you'll see some communities take a really hands-off approach. Some communities, it really is impactful to their neighborhoods and their districts, so they've, really looked into regulating these. And unfortunately, in our situation, we did have an issue that raised this topic, and hence I was tasked with kind of first bringing it at the Community Development Committee to talk about how they'd like to, to address it. There's several ways. There is no one way. I think everyone looks at it on a community by community basis. From my research, and it's hard to get some of this research off just the websites because, some of the information isn't always accurate, but we don't really seem to have a crisis in our community. I think at the time when I was doing this, there was only about 7 that I was to confirm that were being short-term rentals in our community. And I've since gone back, and it's still the same ones that are advertising. And so, there is one component that the village board is moving forward with on this issue is licensing these short-term rentals. That is something they're going to do. But we also, as staff, recognize we should look at our zoning code and make sure, one, we define what a short-term rental is, because the way I interpreted our code is we don't define a short-term rental, but really the closest thing to a short-term rental is a bed and breakfast. I mean, that's kind of how I classified it when I was getting some of these calls initially. And some other towns have also taken that approach, but recognize they should make their code more clear. Because our bed and breakfast definition states it's only permitted in a B3. So we were kind of saying these weren't allowed, but they've been popping up. So I've given you some research. I mean, this is just becoming more and more prevalent, the home sharing and the economy sharing in general. What we thought we would do was, my recommendation is that we would permit them in the residential districts with some feedback I wanted from you guys. Some communities raised concerns about multifamily. And multifamily generally regulates itself because usually there's some association or there's some other entity involved. But in some ways, we can still look at maybe looking if we want to allow them in multifamily, which is common. We limit a percentage of the building that could be occupied by short-term rental. Again, it's an enforcement thing. The only way we would enforce it is if people follow the licensing program. So when a license came in, I would verify that, they're not exceeding a percentage of the number of units in the building. That's one way to handle multifamily. If there's a concern that you might see a building, 50% of these become short-term rental. But another thing I was suggesting that I saw another community do was limit the short-term rental to owner-occupied homes. And the reason for that is I think communities recognize they didn't want to hurt those residents that are, wanting an opportunity to have some other supple income because maybe they travel a lot or they have a really big house that, it lends itself to that. But we felt that, or at least I thought researching this, that by making it owner-occupied, you still have someone primarily living in the home, which we're seeing these short-term rentals be in traditional neighborhoods. They're in your traditional single-family neighborhoods. But by having and requiring that person still be their primary home, it kind of maybe helps with the situation of a vacant home that for whatever reason, the person doesn't want to sell it, they live in Florida or whatever, and then it just becomes a regular rental for the weekends on a regular basis. I've been told that, you know, during certain concert seasons, you start seeing this pop up more, and that's, I think, also been communicated to me by the residents that were raising this issue. They did say that, depending on the season, it kind of dictated the type of tenants that would be, or the people that would be renting the home. So it's seasonal. I think it's seasonal for us. Again, we're not a downtown Nashville or a New Orleans situation where we have a lot of people coming because we're a touristy place, but we do have some things in our community that might lend itself where you might see this happening more. Obviously, the amphitheater is one, but all the programming we're going to be doing with the plaza, the train station is also makes us a nice location. So we thought we should talk about this. We should put some regulations in, and we can always evaluate and kind of tweak this as we see fit. One point of discussion too I wanted to have with the group would be if they felt if we permitted it in residential districts, if we made a distance requirement. I've seen some communities do that. You see communities do that with group homes and other things like that. And the reason is so that you don't particularly have a whole block.
You mean distance from each other?
Yes, a distance from each other. And that would be something we would articulate in the zoning code, and it would be enforced through the licensing program as well. I don't have a magic number, but, you know, kind of 1,000 feet is kind of what people use for certain uses and distances. And, I didn't see any magic number out there, but maybe if you guys want to pursue that, I could kind of give you some examples of some neighborhoods and show you distances and what that would mean. And some other best practices that I've seen also would be that, again, the neighborhood quotas, we would not allow them to be publicly advertising through signage, that it's a short-term rental. Just making sure that they're also, addressing their garbage disposal. One thing that I liked was that one of them, through the licensing, required that they post noise regulations. Sometimes when people are out of town and, they kind of are, at a house, renting a house for a weekend, and they kind of are loud neighbors, so kind of.
So you mean kind of like in the way you go to a hotel?
Yeah.
And on the back of the door, there's the exits and all the rules. So somewhere in the short-term rental,
Correct.
it would be on there.
And then part of the licensing program, which I know is not your purview, but it's important for you guys to understand how we think about taking this to the next level, is we would do a basic inspection. You're going to open your house out to the public. We want to make sure, that it's got some of the basic life safety stuff in there. And that's something I'm going to continue conversations with the fire department, because the fire department too there's a lot of codes that, once you start opening yourself up to the public, a lot of things have to come into play. And a lot of these communities recognized that, they kind of don't follow the code 100% because it would make it impractical for some of these places. But it is something I'm going to
to have folks required to have an AED in their property because they're using it like a hotel. I mean,
Yeah.
those are the kinds of things you're looking
Yeah.
at.
Well, you get someone who's not familiar with the home, and if there is a fire,
Yeah,
you're not
an
sure
escape
where to
plan and-
go. But again, we think by having it be an owner-occupied home, maybe, there might be less of some of those concerns, but,
So with that too, with the owner occupying, you'd have to have a minimum number of days that it would have to be occupied by the owner?
we don't that's a good question. I can talk to my attorney if we define
Because otherwise,
that.
if the owner says, well, I'm there 1 month out of 12,
Yeah,
is it still owner occupied? Yeah.
and that's a
The other
hard
11,
thing.
I live in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And
you have to
that's-
pay the tax.
And everyone acknowledges we can put all this stuff in writing, but at the end of the day, how do I
Right.
know this person? So
How do you monitor?
Yeah, and because people have even asked me, well, Kimber, how do you have them prove that there's a primary occupancy? Well, you do everything that you can. Show me your license, that your driver license says this is your, your primary address, because we all have to list your primary address on your license. We can look at the bill, the tax bill, where it's going to. I mean, there's ways, we can find out. And neighbors are helpful to it.
Yeah, if they're
It becomes
filing
a
their
problem
tax in
property.
Florida and they're trying to say that it's owner occupied, that
Right, but we also have to be thinking, and not necessarily the plan commission, but, the village as a whole, any sort of regulations that you put out there have to be enforceable.
Right.
And have to be practical. The cost of enforcement or even monitoring, and that's, again, I've read through much of what you've given us here, and I work with a lot of younger folks who do this sort of thing everywhere they go,
Yeah.
right? And, I don't necessarily know what the attraction here in Tinley Park would be yet, but we hope the village continues to succeed in certain ways, and hopefully we do have the type of attractiveness where this, and this is not going to slow down. This is going to expand. So it's good that we're getting ahead of it. But
oh, I could,
in terms of, I noticed that you had in there about crime-free housing, and I do know that that's an important thing because your traditional landlords have to comply with that.
Right.
And, so when we look at this short-term thing, it's, from an equity standpoint, it's only fair. And not only from the owners, but also from the village. But in terms of, how's the village going to license it, regulate it, monitor it, collect
Yeah.
it? How do you know whether they rented it 10 times or 3 times, right? So I could see that those are the challenges. Maybe it's a flat fee per year.
Yeah, it would be
you
an annual license, so, then that way, in the license, we also dictate the, requirements to be licensed, and it gives the village the ability to revoke a license if we get so many complaints or, disturbances. We can say, look, you're not allowed to have this anymore.
So an administrative fee for the license, but not necessarily a tax on the revenue?
Well, there was discussions about that, because some communities, as you'll know, started to say, hey, you know what, we're gonna put a tax on this. This is no different than a hotel.
Right, we have a hotel tax.
Right, yeah. And it doesn't sound like the village board wants to pursue that avenue at this point, because if it's owner occupied, it doesn't sound like, and there's some administration with that too, and collecting the tax, and it's kind of, some of the bigger towns were doing it. Naperville is recently doing it.
that was my next thought is, are there any comparable towns to ours, Downers Grove, Naperville, Orland, Schaumburg, that have any kind of already established policies?
Yeah, and there's a lot, Evanston is another community that licensed them, but a lot of the discussion was tax. Oak Park requires the hotel motel tax on the short-term rental. There are several communities that are now pursuing that, and then that might be in those communities are seeing an uptick maybe, and they're saying, this is, I think
If there's
at the end
profit,
of the
there's
day,
tax in it.
when the government looks at this type of use, is we're trying to keep everyone kind of fair and equal. As a business owner, you have to go through a lot of requirements, to be a business. And this, in a way, is somewhat of a commercial use, and so that's why I think some towns are saying, all right, we're gonna also apply the tax, so it's equal. And we have a lot of hotels in our community, so it's important that we,
Well, in effect, if you don't tax it, then what you're essentially doing is, however you want to look at it, you're either subsidizing that type of business at the expense of the hotels, or you're fining the hotels. Either way, you're making it more attractive for
It's the Uber
that.
versus taxis
Yeah.
yeah.
battle.
Yeah, so, yeah, there is an equity issue there, but there's also a administrative cost with,
Right,
with
to
trying
collect
to,
tax.
to identify them, collect them, monitor it. And as happens quite often, with just regular rentals, like an, annual lease of a rental property, I could tell you right now, there's a lot of them in this town that are not authorized or legitimate. So I guess I'll say the village doesn't know about them. And people have not taken the crime-free housing or provided their lease to the village, gotten their license from the village, all of that. And that's, that's a long-term rental,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And there's challenges identifying and enforcing that. Short-term, one night, 2 night, I mean, that's
Yeah.
really tough. And what'll happen is, in the same way that we're in effect punishing the hotels and subsidizing these short terms, the same thing happens with the owners who are complying, right? They're the ones who are paying for it, and these other people are making,
Yeah.
more money because they're not paying for it. So
And it was-
there's an equity and an enforcement issue.
I think it was in this National League of Cities where the gentleman, hostcompliance.com, obviously he has something he's trying to sell, but he indicated making it completely prohibited doesn't stop this activity, and it costs more money to regulate something prohibited than having something on the books that would allow it. So I think that's our approach too, is let's get something on the books, let's define it, let's talk about where we want it. I think it more is a licensing issue with the village, but from a zoning standpoint, I didn't know if anyone had a strong feeling of it can only be in this district. Looking at all of our zoning districts, there's no real, as you can see, they were a little bit of everywhere, and they want to be in residential districts. So that's why I thought, let's just do them in all residential districts. Let's talk about maybe a quota, so we, don't happen to see 5 in a row or something like that.
I do like the idea of having some sort of density or radius. I like that. On the other hand, now I can't think of any neighborhoods in Tinley except, maybe right at the heart of downtown, where you might have a stretch that would lend itself to having a bunch of them in a row, right?
Yeah.
Like if you think of some seaside resort towns or something like that, you might have like an older neighborhood that's right there on the beach or something, and that might actually be an attractive neighborhood to have a bunch of them. I don't know that we necessarily have that sort of thing.
Other than downtown or adjacent, maybe the 80th Avenue train station.
Right.
Where people were going into the city for concerts and things. And
Yep.
Yeah, and that's
Rather
where we
than
saw a
paying
few of
$400
them,
a night at a
they
hotel.
advertise that, close proximity to the train station, so.
Yeah.
um,
So I agree that I think it's something that the village should be proactive about and look at before it just becomes out of hand. And some of the extreme worst-case scenarios, just having stopgap control measures in there, in place. And I personally, I mentioned the crime-free housing. I think that's a really good measure that the village has in place that can, in those extreme situations, it gives the village a remedy, and it gives the neighbors and the actual owner some enforcement. So I think it's good to get ahead of that.
So, in general then, are you thinking that the approach I'm taking would be appropriate, permitting them, and remember, it's an accessory use to a residential home, so it would be permitted in all the zoning districts as an accessory use. And then, I can come back with some suggestions on how we could regulate it from distance from one another, or, like you said, creating a quota. Multifamily, do you want to approach that as well as a similar type of quota? If you have a building, no more than 25% can be licensed or, occupied. That's how you know, some communities raised issue with that. I just thought,
I think if you can come back with some more data
okay,
that I think Commissioner Augustiniak brought up about areas, other communities, so we have an idea of what we're looking at.
okay,
I think at the end of the day, as homeowners, you want to make sure you don't want to have, something, gets put in place, and then you're going to start having rentals coming next to you. Of course, you're going to be the first one complaining about that,
yeah.
but, it's,
Well, 'cause there's-
we're invested in the community, and we want to make sure that, it remains that way.
A lot of folks like the
Right.
concept of Airbnb, as long as it's not next door to me,
Well,
that's,
Yeah.
that's
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
And like the seaside resorts that you're talking about, they've been kind of accustomed in dealing with this for a lot longer time than now what we're starting to see spill into kind of non-touristy places.
Yeah, so I think, I personally don't have an answer for this, but I think that is something we need to think about in terms of what areas of our town might currently be attractive. Where is this, like the few you listed there, geographically within the town. What parts of the town are now or in the future might be more attractive? And what parts of the town would not be? And it might be an easy thing to just kind of carve that out. And again, I don't have the details here, but it's something to think about. Are there parts of the town, in spite of the fact that they might be attractive, we still don't want it, right? Because to your point, in theory, somebody might say, hey, it's a great idea, why would we want to stop, people from having a source of income and all that, but not this house next door to me, right? So, we got to figure out how to manage all of those concerns. And
Do you?
only some of that falls under the purview of zoning,
Right,
right?
right.
So that's the first part, how the village manages the crime-free housing and the licensing and all that.
Because that was my challenge, because even if I took the downtown area, you'll have multiple different zoning, because at first we were saying, okay, we won't have any in R1. Then I started looking at R1, I'm like, well, that's a little bit of here, a little bit of there. And then, like, even just the downtown, we couldn't take the approach of just one simple district. It sounds like you're kind of taking like a boundary approach, maybe, is that what
Or
you're
maybe you
thinking?
took like the downtown area where, right down where the train station's at,
Yeah.
Oak Park Avenue, that, encompass that area right around there. Maybe that's, I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but centralize an area, and then that becomes whoever's in that area, if they want to go and participate in that, then they can.
Yeah, so I am thinking in terms of whether or not it would make sense to have a kind of a zone based on what's already attractive or where we think the trend might be going in the future. That might be the core, right? Downtown, but I don't know. I mean, it might be the southern half of town because the amphitheater is attracting people and they want to, rent
Some of it
something out by the golf course, right?
depends on the development at 183rd and Harlem.
Yeah.
If that turns into some sports complex, nobody knows what it's gonna be.
Yeah.
But if it does, all of a sudden you might have people coming in for a 4-day tournament go, maybe I could rent a house, especially if one of the bigger homes in Bristol Park or that have built-in pools and that kind of thing, and so.
Yeah, so I'm not necessarily advocating for one approach or another. I'm thinking in terms of trying to balance all interests and concerns. Not only the people who live in town, but also just thinking from a administrative perspective. If we, for instance, have a corridor or a strip, maybe not by actual zone R1, R2, but, some sort of,
Like an overlay
like,
district?
I hate to say another overlay district, but
Yeah.
something of that nature. That's great, you're regulating it within here and prohibiting it everywhere else. Then you run into the, what you just said is, it's gonna happen out there, right?
Yeah.
Like say this is the attractive strip, just outside the border, that's where it's gonna be, and it's gonna be uncontrolled. So, maybe the better thing is just to have a blanket approach to the entire town, and then you just let the market forces decide
And I
where
think
it
that
is.
approach allows us that, people hopefully will prefer to take the path of compliance and get the license and do, and be, I think most people wanna be law abiding and do what they need to do, as long as they can continue doing what they're doing. And our goal is to make sure we have we have data, we can know where these places are, and we can start understanding, if there's a problem or not, and we have things in control that gives us the ability, if someone does call us and say, hey, I've got a problem with this property, we now have the ability to kind of do something where we don't really have it much now.
Right.
I mean, a nuisance complaint we can handle with the police, but other things might evolve.
Well, that's, the approach has to be to make it painless and easy to comply,
Yeah.
and make it very painful to not comply.
Yeah.
So-
You might have stated this in the report, as far as rentals, like the number of rentals in Tenley.
Well, I was just talking to one of our code guys, and I think he said there are like 900 properties in the crime-free housing program. So, that's essentially our.
That's good, that's more than I expected. Does that include all the multi-family and apartments
So
and?
I was gonna ask you.
I want to, because they break down things in buildings and in units, and we were just talking about it, and I remember our conversation was he was surprised at how many single-family homes are rented in the community. So I think he said there's over 900 units. Am I
Well, that's
surprised?
actually far more than I expected. It makes me wonder what the stat would be on,
Yeah.
if that's the number, what percentage or how many are not,
Right.
so.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know, another community I was at, who had a rental program on the books, and then it kind of went to the wayside because they had nobody to manage it. But, when I'd gotten there and I saw that we weren't managing it, we started bringing it back up. Took the program from like 30 rental units to over 200, and a lot of it was single-family homes. Like, I think people were shocked that, I think there are still people recovering from the recession, never got out of it, or they have a family member coming from another country, so they have this extra house. So it's kind of interesting to see that there's more rental homes than maybe in the past.
A lot of people get stuck with real estate.
Yep,
They can't afford to sell it,
yep. Or, yeah, it doesn't make sense to sell it because they're underwater, or you downsize, or, so yeah, our housing is, the millennials, or they talk about what they're gonna be buying, it's different.
Yep.
A lot of them aren't buying,
Yeah, they'd rather rent.
Yes.
they're afraid to make the
So,
commitment.
I encourage you, if you have any other, call me, text me, email me, this is a fun discussion, it's ever evolving, and, I think the harder task is gonna be the enforcement if we go forward with the
Yep.
program, but.
So I would ask what you're envisioning are the next steps as this moves along in the discussion process. And I would also say that I think this is potentially an area where the village, the planning department, plan commission could take an alternative approach, outreach for the community. I mean, let's face it, not everybody is, tuning in, watching our exciting show here, right? I think this is the kind of thing that the village could be a little proactive about in, kind of holding, we're gonna have a public hearing, right, eventually on this. But, just seeking input from the community to make sure that.
Doesn't come across as a surprise.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that's a challenge, because the planning department does everything they can to try and get the word out there.
Yeah.
But, so what do you think at least currently, that the timeline for doing something would
Sure.
be?
Well, like I said, I just was hopefully doing a public hearing on the 21st, but that might be too soon to allow the opportunity for what you're kind of saying. What I could do is work with our marketing department and utilize, I know they have, I don't want to speak, but I know they have a TV program where they interview, and, you know, maybe there's an opportunity when they do that outreach. I'm sure there's some type of, maybe survey we can put on our website too. So I can work towards that and, share with you guys how I think we can do that, and then maybe I'll have data by the 21st, but maybe not. Maybe it'd be our March 7th meeting, where we might have the public hearing then, and then maybe I can get the input too.
Okay.
Do you think that's a good approach?
Well, so procedurally, we could have a public hearing, and we don't necessarily have to act immediately, especially depending on what the, I guess what I'm saying in terms of trying to engage the public a little bit in advance of that, the public hearing serves, that's the purpose of it.
Oh, okay. I thought you
In
were
the-
wanting to do a little bit more.
But try to get as much, I think, to have as much data as we can
Yeah.
prior to that
Yeah.
would be beneficial. So
Right.
that we don't wanna get people thinking the wrong thing, and I mean, we're working together on this. So
Mhm.
come up with some
Okay.
plan that would work.
Yeah, I think I just drew a blank on what they call it. Is it Tinley Spotlight or something of that nature that Donna does?
Right.
Right.
That was what I
Um,
was thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly try to at least put the word out there, and to the extent people have an opinion, you know, I mean, that's gonna be helpful for us, so.
So,
But I don't think, I don't want to speak for the commission, but, you know, I don't think we necessarily need to alter the timeline that you're already working towards. Because if we get to that point and the consensus is that we don't have enough information, we don't necessarily have to act.
right.
But if we do, we can, right?
Makes sense.
So,
I would agree with that.
so at this point, does anyone feel that we would need to push that date out, or are we comfortable just letting Kimberly go with the timeline she's already got?
The only thing I would just say about the date is maybe just for the fact so we can get the public opinion, and that making sure they know that this is going on so they can come to that meeting, you know, so they can voice their opinions, because we know there are some people that have some very strong opinions about this, that have spoken at other things that I'm sure would want to speak again, most likely to us, and then anybody else that doesn't know about it, or people that are thinking about doing this as a way to make a little extra money and maybe want to know a little bit more about the process. So it's just on the notification side of letting the public know as best we can, you know, would be the only reason I would see to alter the timeline from, 2 weeks from now, so, you know, or 3 weeks, whatever it works out to be. I don't know what today is.
Okay. Has it been noticed?
Not yet. It will-
15 to 30?
Right, oh wait, we did notice this, didn't we? It noticed on January 30th, so it has been noticed.
Okay. Well, yeah, all the more reason. And again, if we get to that point, even to the point where we get through the public hearing, you know, we can always continue. And so I think that'd be good. To the extent Donna can, you know, market it a little bit, get some word out. And there's only so much the village can do
Yeah.
to try and engage the public in advance of a decision like this. And, you know, then at that point, you just got to do what's in the best interest.
Right. Okay.
So, beat that one up pretty good, at least as much as we can for this evening. That was the last official item on our agenda for this evening. And we have the good of the order.
Sure. We'll go to the order. I know, Agnieszka mentioned that, you know, the mental health center has been a big point of discussion, and staff's been, you know, kind of working along with that project. We have some various committees established internally, externally, reaching out to the various stakeholders, gaining input. We had a very nice conversation with the school districts that the village manager held, as well as the park districts, just talking about the site again. You know, what are their concerns, and what are some of their thoughts, and kind of getting some of that input. We are working with a preferred developer, which just basically says we're working with them to, the next 6 months to negotiate some type of a deal. They have a land plan they presented that, we're still working internally, with staff and the developer. There's a lot of fact finding, there's a lot of just, stuff that they're trying to find out from us, capacity concerns, utilities and stuff like that. So we're ironing through that. But the goal is that the developer would like to host eventually, I want to call it an IDOT style meeting, where you have poster boards and then the public, it's like an open house. They'd have various, of their team established at different stations, and it would give people the opportunity to have dialogue. I know that's one, thing they're working towards. Don't have a date on that yet. But it's an active project, and I'm heavily involved in it, as well as, with our rest of our team in seeing what this developer, potentially, if the state decides to sell it or whatever, they could take the property and develop it. So, if you have any questions on that, feel free to contact me. We have on our website, whatever information we have on the mental health center, we keep it updated, on there. Last Tuesday, or this past Tuesday, they mentioned that there is a couple of bills in front of the,
Senate.
governor, and that was all happening that night. We found out about that they're pushing the governor to consider, getting the appraisals and then hiring an environmental, consultant to do an analysis of the environmental.
At
phase
cost
one,
to the
phase
state,
two.
right?
Yeah, so
They would be paying.
So to my understanding, and people I recommend should do their own research and go look. My understanding is it's 2 Senate bills, so they're not before the governor yet. They're-
Sorry,
No, I just want to make sure we don't mix things up and people think it's progressed further than it has. To my understanding, 2 Senate bills have been introduced. They would need to pass the Senate, go to the House, and then move on to the governor. So there's a legislative process in place there. My concern, and I've said it from the commission before, is just ensuring that the Plan Commission is appropriately engaged in the process at the right time. I will speak for myself that I just want to ensure that at the time that it comes to the Plan Commission, it's not effectively a done deal, and then we're being asked to,
Rubber stamp it.
to polish the corners here and there. I don't know that it's necessarily appropriate for us to insert ourselves into it too early in the process. So that's what I'll say. As chair of the Plan Commission from up here, I'll refrain from making any other personal opinions about that up here. So to extend anybody else has comments on the mental health center.
I just have one, is there, because I saw something, and I'm assuming that I read this right when I was reading about it. It seemed that one of the towns next to us with property that borders us is looking at the same type of development that is being proposed for that property. Orland Hills over at 171st and 94th Avenue. There was something I saw recently about them looking at developing that property, that open farmland there, as a same type of development, I believe senior development.
171st in LaGrange?
94th, between 94th and LaGrange Road there,
That's
the open
Orland.
farmland.
Yes, we received.
Orland,
a-
whichever Orland it is,
Yeah,
yes.
Orland Park,
Orland
that's
Park.
actually.
Orland Park,
their
okay.
We did receive a notice, the planning department received a notice of that plan.
Mhm.
And I don't know if they have a scheduled date yet for that, but because that's across the street from us, we would be involved in, any commenting on that. I didn't know if it was senior or not, I just remember seeing a site.
Senior,
They have,
It was over 55, I believe, or something
Okay.
like that.
55 and over
Yeah.
along 94th Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the parcel just south of 167th bordering LaGrange would be a hotel.
Yeah.
And the rest
Yeah.
would ring a retail.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there'd
You know how many acres approximately?
it was a large parcel, I don't know. I don't know off
Uh,
the top of my
yeah,
head.
because it's
It was big.
quarter-mile square roughly, or,
That's the entire parcel.
Yeah.
Except for the developed that already has that one residential area on it. I think it's about redeveloping the whole thing that's at 167th and 94th.
Yeah,
There's just south of there, there's a
townhome
townhome
development,
development
Ace
there, yeah.
Hardware, the Wendy's gas
Yeah.
station.
Yeah,
I think,
so.
Yeah, that's one of our questions too. As a village, we are working with a consultant, SB Friedman, and they're doing some of the economic analysis. And one of our questions is, what is already existing around us with seniors? What's planned? I reached out to, there's an agency that is called Northeastern Agency on Aging. And they kind of know a lot about what's going on in senior living, so I kind of reached out to them. They gave me some resources to contact to further find out some of the needs in the area. So that's a good point. I mean, that's what we're all kind of asking too. How much senior can we have and what's going on around us? So sorry, that's kind of a nice fun project that is keeping us busy. And then secondly, another big project in the downtown, as you guys may have known, you call it North Street. It's changed a bunch of names, but we're hoping to get them in front of you guys in a workshop. My goal was actually February 21st. I'm still trying to shoot for that. We're still working out some things, so that would be another downtown project in the former Central Middle School site, and it'd be also acquiring some land that'd be adjacent to our future plaza. And so that's another mixed-use kind of a product. So we're hoping to get them in front of you on the 21st as a workshop. If not, they'd go to the March 7th meeting. And Banging Gavel is in for permit. We just hope that they can get started soon. And so is the Sip Wine Bar next door to them. They got their grants from the Oak Park Playbook approved the other night.
Any update or noteworthy movement on the Brookside Glen, the residences of Brookside Glen? I know a while back, they were doing some earth moving. There was a question about permits or something like that. Anything new?
The Magnuson,
Yes.
we call that residential apartment complex. Yes, they are in for permit. Probably will start come spring, but that project is moving forward in the building permit process.
Okay,
we'll see.
so prior to the onset of the winter season, was there any activity out there? I thought they
Yeah,
had done
did-
some
yeah, they did
earth
do
moving.
They started some site work,
Okay.
some grading. We got that all addressed. We made sure they got their erosion control all established. Our engineering department's been with them, ironing all of that out. So now, we've got them on a right path to the process and get their permits so they can start all the building work.
Okay, and how about the former Bremen Cash Store property? Has that pushed back through the process a little bit? Where do we stand on that one?
Yeah, I think that project, as far as the village moving forward with an incentive, they've made some other adjustments to that. I haven't gotten word from the Tuesday night meeting where their team is at. Initially, they were hoping to continue the entitlement process with you guys, so that maybe if they weren't able to develop, they could find someone that'd be willing to develop it because it has approved plans, which makes it, kind of marketable. So, it's unfortunately might not be a deal that's getting worked out with the incentive, but they might still want to try to get the entitlement.
Okay. Anything else from the commission? Okay, and you'd run through all the points there? All right,
Those are
thank you.
highlights.
I appreciate it. Receive comments from the public. We got the new cameras, so no one's hiding back there on us? All right. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting.
So moved.
Move Commissioner Augustiniak, second Commissioner Manny. All in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you,